Well, today on UVA Legends podcast, I have defensive tackle Ron Carey, who helped lead the Who's to a number 1 ranking in 1990 as a defensive tackle. One of our greatest seasons in football, actually in UVA sports history. Thanks for joining me, Ron.
It's good to be with you today, Julian.
Yeah. So I hadn't heard too much from you over the years. I think we've recently become Facebook friends, and then lately I've been reading about this fascinating documentary that you've got involved with, called the Richmond. It's called the Richmond Planet, Birth of a Planet, based on the Richmond Planet, a black-owned newspaper that existed in city of Richmond, Virginia, after the 1880s. Seems like a fascinating project. I know that you're CEO of a marketing company. So, what is the relation of your marketing company Tilt to this project, and what exactly is the project about?
No, I appreciate the question. It's we've been incredibly fortunate at Tilt, our company. Been incredibly fortunate to do a lot of great storytelling, and the opportunity actually came along. It started it very simple, that we were looking to do a mural in the back of our video production studio in Richmond. And we did a mural, and we were looking for wonderful historical stories, and came across the story of the Richmond Planet, which was started by 13 enslaved people back in the late 1800s. And from there, we thought, let's record and document kind of the painting of this wall and the story, this wonderful artist Hamilton Glass. From there, the team kind of took over the story and really started to understand that there's a deeper story here about John Mitchell Jr., about the Richmond Planet newspaper, and this fight for justice that was going on in the anti-lynching and all of the rest of it. So that would then birthed a 30-minute full-length documentary film that we were proud to bring to the world this year, after about a year, or just over a year's worth of work.
And this is your first film, because I know you guys are in March. Oh,
yeah, this is our first 30-minute full-length film. We've done long form content for some wonderful partners. One of our great partners is Audi, and we've done a number of long 14-minute, 15-minute pieces of video content for them. But this was our first feature film that we've done from scratch.
well, this is really interesting to me, because when I first read the article about you on the UVA magazine. I forgot which one. A guy named John Mitchell Jr. was hired as editor by the 13 former slaves you referenced, and John Mitchell Jr. was also a former slave who'd been raised by, I guess, a aristocrat who he was able to get against his wishes, get educated, and was very much a go-getter and stuff. But when you think of Richmond as a Northern Virginian, I've never seen Richmond as being progressive. I mean, I was actually surprised to read in the time after Reconstruction, where good things were happening to former slaves. When you were going towards the Jim Crow area, that there was a vibrant newspaper in Richmond. And I guess when I dug deeper, there was a vibrant business district. There was a Black Wall Street, the Jackson Ward district. I never knew about that. I knew the history, a little bit about the unfortunate history in Tulsa, but this is something I didn't really know about. Did you know about all that history? I know you're from.
No, great question. And not to the extent that I learned about it in us putting together the documentary. I mean, I grew up as a kid going to Jackson Ward, and that's where we would, as an young African American kid growing up, that's where I'd go and get my, the barbershop was there. Consolidated Bank was there. Consolidated had been started by Maggie Walker. You had statues of Bill Bojangles, Rob. So there was a lot of history that was in Jackson Ward that you would just feel and walk around. There was the Hippodrome Theater. What I knew as a kid is, certainly you knew Maggie Walker. You certainly knew Monument Avenue because of the statues and kind of what was going on in that front. And you knew about that Richmond had been a great venue for entertainers coming through, in Jackson Ward specifically, back in the 1930s. And so I almost thought about that as kind of Harlem in the Renaissance period in New York, and that Richmond was that vibrant place. But to the extent that you're talking about, in terms of Richmond being economically viable and strong, and there being this alternate African American society that existed well before Tulsa. No, to that extent, I hadn't known it quite as well as what I learned when we did a bunch of the research. So it's an amazing progress, and it was amazing to go back and even see just some of the comments that John Mitchell Jr. was making back when the statues, the Confederate statues went up long ago, that he was making the comment, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially the comment that we'll be the folks that put these statues up, and one day we being African Americans will be the folks that take these statues back down. So it was pretty prophetic in what he was talking about, but it was also amazing because, and I often talk about things in terms of what's the blueprint. John Mitchell Jr., was an entrepreneur, right? Before folks were talking about entrepreneur, and they were investing in banks and insurance companies um, and lots of other businesses, and telling stories about that, and supporting and encouraging other African Americans in the community to do the same. So there's a rich history here that I was just proud that we got to be a part of telling that story.
Yeah, the Maggie Walker, you mentioned her. I know Maggie Walker because when my sister was in high school, we played Maggie Walker in the state finals in basketball. And then lately, you may have noticed that I've been chronicling kind of the history of basketball and football in the state of Virginia. So Maggie Walker was one of the first. Well, it was an all black school before integration, and after integration, it still existed. And I think eventually it became part of Marshall Walker and all that stuff. But I didn't realize who Maggie Walker actually was. And then this John Mitchell guy, fascinating figure. One thing I had read in the materials was that he used to carry 2 guns with him wherever he went. Now, when I thought about it, I would think 2 guns might not be enough for a black entrepreneur in Richmond around that time. It seems like it made sense that they had this business community that could give him some cover, because it seemed like it'd be a very dangerous time to do the kind of things that he was doing.
Oh, incredibly dangerous time. I mean, as we chronicle in the story, at one point, he's threatened, right? He's threatened that there are certain parts of the state that he shouldn't come to. He literally straps on his 2 Colt 45s. He's got his version of the Green Book in terms of where he can travel safely and who he can stay with and which back roads to take and all of the rest, but takes a train to a certain part of the state because he's doing this all in an effort to save a young man that has been accused of a crime and is in jeopardy of losing his life. And John Mitchell Jr. is making a petition to the governor that in fact this young man should not be hung. And he certainly marches into the part of the state where he's been told not to come, and fortunately nothing happens to him. But he was savvy, he was smart, as his great nephew John Mitchell, who lives in Richmond, has said. He was savvy and smart and a bit braggadocious, but knew these things needed to be done, and he went into those challenging circumstances, often at his own, possibly peril to his own life.
So he was known throughout the state. The Richmond paper, I believe its circulation was about 4,000 a week. He was a well-known figure in the state.
It sounds like he was not only a well-known figure in the state, but what I was surprised to figure out, right? We African Americans and folks who love history often will hear of Frederick Douglass, and we'll hear of Marcus Garvey, and we'll hear of these figures. Well, interestingly enough, one of the stories that was recounted and shared back to us was that Marcus Garvey had actually approached John Mitchell Jr. about how to kind of move things forward in the country and sought his advice on things. So he was clearly a figure that was well known inside of the state, but it sounds like also beyond the state. And what's interesting is, and we couldn't dive as deeply into that part of the story. There was only so much time, but one of the 13 founders that were involved with the Planet, one of them was the first Yale Law School graduate.
Wow.
Right. So this was Ida B. Wells occasionally wrote for the Richmond Planet. So this was you kind of had a very intellectual, smart, focused group of individuals. And as we even talk about in the story, John Mitchell Jr., you spoke earlier about growing up on the plantation, right? But he was right at the knee of what it looked like to be an American, in terms of the gentleman who owned the plantation, in terms of how to function and how to think about business and how to read and write and all of these important things. And once he gathered that knowledge, what he wanted to do was to pass that knowledge back on to other African Americans, so that they would be entitled and have the same abilities that he had, skill sets that he had been able to generate.
Yeah. Well, one thing I tried to figure out is oftentimes in the old days, newspapers were tied to to sports teams.
Mhm.
But I could not find a Richmond team in the Negro leagues. So there wasn't a Richmond baseball team in the Negro league. I know there was a
Now,
Richmond Cubs or
that's a
Richmond
great
Giants.
that's a great question.
Yeah.
I won't speak to because I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
I know over time there were a variety of different sports teams that would try and get started. Richmond has always had an interesting history as it pertains to professional sports teams and their ability to survive and thrive here. So I'm not quite sure if we ever had
Yeah,
a Negro League team here
I
in
don't think
Richmond.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a lot of strong leaders of his time, it didn't end too well for John Mitchell. I mean, his legacy lives on, which is great. But I guess he ended up quite poor. Ended up running for governor. The Democrats, the Republicans wouldn't run him because they were afraid of a split ticket. But he actually ran for governor in Virginia later on in his life.
He did, and it's interesting. His nephew, great nephew, talks about the fact that, you're right, there were some accusations made in terms of the bank that he was one of the founders of,
Mhm.
and some questions around um, had some inappropriate things taken place at the banking institution. So certainly some of that stuff played a factor, and I think even and these are his great nephew's words were, right, he had a certain way, he lacked maybe the finesse that Maggie Walker had.
Mhm.
And as a result of kind of this, approach of continuing to lead headfirst into concrete, walls in challenging situations, and kind of that confrontational style that ultimately that style and that approach to things may have been part of his undoing.
Yeah, yeah, it's too bad. And the Richmond Planet, I believe it ended up being consumed by another black newspaper in Richmond. I think it's the Richmond All American, I believe.
It was the All American. Then I think, which ultimately you've got a version of the Free Press
Okay,
today, and
right.
so that evolved over time, and so over these things, many of them weren't incredibly profitable, but it have just consolidated back up over time. So yeah.
Yeah, and is there still a vibrant black business community in Richmond? Like, we know there's one in Atlanta, obviously in DC, and some of the southern cities. There are. Is there? Would you consider the business community in Richmond vibrant as
Yeah,
well?
I would consider it a vibrant business community. I think what we've seen is that it's ebbed and flowed, right? Because you've had financial things like the financial institutions. Consolidated Bank was consolidated with another financial institution that I believe is headquartered out of West Virginia. You don't have as many. You have, compared to the late 1800s and the number of insurance companies that were black owned and financial institutions, right? It certainly doesn't rival that, but you've got a number of the barbershops and that kind of thing. What you do also have, and I've noticed this probably over the last 5 to 10 years, particularly as an entrepreneur, which is there are quite a few more African American men and women who have started companies over time that are based here in Richmond. A number of marketing and advertising firms, a number of real estate companies. There's a woman who's developed a wine company here. So what's old is new again, and it seems that a number of African American owned businesses are on the upswing.
And it's also a great time. And a couple of years ago, I was driving through town. As you probably know, there's a lot of soccer going on in Richmond. There's a lot of tournaments.
Lots.
Yes,
Yep.
I was staying in town. I drove down Monument Avenue. It was unbelievable to see. First of all, to see the Arthur Ashe monument. I had never seen it. Arthur Ashe is a Richmond incredible tennis player. I think he won Wimbledon in like 77, 78 or so.
Hmm.
But then all the Civil War monuments have been torn down. I think the last time I was there was only one that was still remaining.
Hmm.
As a native Richmonder, it must be a fascinating time to still live in Richmond and to see all those changes.
It's an exciting time, honestly, and it's exciting for this reason, right? I love my father is 79. Um, and I look back at he grew up in Charlottesville, so I'm just going to tie these things together. He grew up in Charlottesville. My grandfather would not have been able to attend the university. My father did attend the university to get his master's after he had attended St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Virginia, for his undergrad. And then he came to Richmond. My dad did. Mom and dad came to Richmond back in the early 60s to begin their existence here and being involved in the community. And so I say it's an exciting time because he's 79, and I remember he and I talking about statues, and I don't think that he certainly believed that that was something he would ever see in his lifetime. And to see the protest and to see just kind of the change that's happening, to see, kind of a president being elected back in, 2008, right? So to see all of that journey in such a compressed amount of time was just, I think, amazing to him. So to me, when I look at it, it's interesting. I saw those. I think I viewed the statues more from a historical perspective as what I would drive past them. And often I think many of us probably didn't give them much more thought. It was just they'd been there, they'd always been there, and we didn't give much thought. But it was monumental because of the message that I think it sent to all African Americans and Americans and Richmonders, that it's like, no, let's have an inclusive community here where we all get to be a part of it. And that's the thing that was most exciting about it, which was it was a positive step in the right direction that we could then all say, wait a minute, no, let's move forward and make Richmond better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what was your father's name, and what year did he graduate from St. Paul's and also graduate school at UVA? The reason why I ask is my father was 53 at Virginia State.
Okay.
And they knew every Black student who was at UVA in grad school. They all knew them because you couldn't go to UVA for undergrad until I think 1970 was the first, maybe 69 was the first class of African Americans, right?
Right.
But there were grad students there all along. Whenever there wasn't a program of its kind in the state, Black students could go to UVA for those programs. So anyway, what about your father?
Yeah, he would have, gosh, let me think back on this. So I know he finished his master's at UVA because there's a picture of me being held and I was 2 at that point. So he would have been there probably 1970, roughly, when he would have been finishing up his master's.
Okay.
And then I won't say where he went and got his PhD in education because
Wow.
our competition a little bit up the road in Blacksburg is where he got his PhD. So he would have finished at St. Paul's. Now I'm trying to think. He's now 79. He was born in 43. So he would have probably finished. Would have finished late 50s or early 60s.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So he gets a degree from St. Paul's in education, and comes
In
home
education.
and teaches in the Richmond area.
And teaches at Nathaniel Bacon Elementary School. And he has some incredible. I look back on that history, and this is the things that you don't think so much about when you're a kid, but as you reflect back on it as an adult now, and I think about the African American leaders that he would have been around, both men and women, who played an influential role in his career in life. And I'm thinking, wow, these folks would stop by, or we'd stop by their house on a Sunday for a visit. And these were just some incredibly powerful and folks in terms of speaking and commitment back to community and helping to raise folks up. But he was a teacher, he was a principal, and then moved into administration, where he became chief of staff for Richmond Public Schools.
Wow.
And that's how he finished up the last part of his career, but ended up serving over 50 years in Richmond Public Schools.
So he probably, the first school, Bacon, was probably a Black school. That was before integration.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, and then he may have known Ricky and Bobby Stokes' dad.
Oh, absolutely, he did.
Right.
He did. And in fact, when the time came for me to go to UVA, which was interesting, he certainly knew the Stokes family. And I still tease Mike Williams, who is a UVA grad as well, because I remember distinctly being a high school kid, and Mike's now in banking here in Richmond, and my dad saying, I've got someone that you need to talk to. And I tease Mike sometimes that he was the one who put me over the top in terms of saying UVA is the place that I'm going to go and be a student athlete. So it's a small world.
Yeah. And how about your mother? Was she a teacher as well?
She was not a teacher. An interesting story. She was from Lynchburg, Virginia, had gone to St. Paul's as well. The family ran out of money. And so she wasn't able to finish when she was during her undergrad years. And so she decided to go back when she was in her mid 40s. And interestingly enough, she graduated from went back to St. Paul's. They had a program so she could go back and finish as an adult. She graduated the same weekend that my brother Jeff graduated from UVA.
That's incredible. And Jeff, is Jeff older or younger than you?
Jeff's 2 years younger and lives down in Atlanta.
Okay, I don't think I knew Jeff. I didn't even know you had a brother that went to UVA.
Yeah, he's in the pharmaceutical business down there.
Oh, that's awesome. So, obviously your dad didn't have the same opportunities you did, but was he an athlete?
Oh, he was an athlete, played football at St. Paul's,
Oh,
and then ended up playing some semi-pro football in Richmond for the Richmond Road Runners, which was a semi-pro club that existed long ago.
wow, that's great. And is that how you got into sports? Did he talk about football? He exposed you to it as well?
You know, it was interesting. I think if I thought back on, I think we just loved sports, period. It didn't matter what sport it was. We played football, we played baseball. I did wrestling back before wrestling was even a popular thing. We did basketball. You know, we did, if there was a season, did something every season. And that was just kind of how we grew up. The concentration in one sport, we didn't even think about it back then, right? And loved football, so played little league football, played high school football, and as it turned out, seemed to be pretty decent at it. And then all of a sudden in high school started to realize, wait a minute, this is something that could be a little bit more if I wanted it to be.
Were you always big?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was, Julian, I'm that kid that you immediately, the little league coach is looking at you going, you're going to do a whole lot of things for us. One of them is going to get into a 3-point or 4-point stance and block and move. And then if we give you the ball, certainly no one's going to tackle you. But yeah, it was always a big kid.
It's always tough for big kids in little league football because it's always a
Yeah.
age for weight things. What happens to big kids in little league football, I don't know if it still does, is you end up having to play with much older kids, which could be kind of dangerous because you're playing with kids that could be 2 or 3 years older than you, and it could be tougher to you at that point just because they're older.
It absolutely could be. I mean, when I first came back to Richmond, a couple of friends got me involved in coaching some little league with kids, and I think the most important thing that I tried to emphasize back with some of these folks that were coaching and with the kids, which is make the experience one that the kids can learn something from and enjoyable. Most kids are not going to go off and become D1 athletes, and they're not going to go off to the league. It doesn't mean that we're trying to discourage them, but make for it a positive experience. And so, to your point, if you're having to play up a weight class, let's make sure we protect the kid, right? Because you don't want to put them in a situation that's not going to be good for them.
Exactly. So I know you grew up in Glen Allen. I remember that from the programs years ago. And my guess is when you were there, it was probably kind of rural. And right now it's in the middle of suburbia. I think there's another high school there that probably wasn't there. You went to Hermitage. I think there's a Glen Allen High School as well that
Mhm.
so you probably share. So what was it like growing up in Glen Allen? And do you still live there?
Don't live in Glen Allen. I live not too far away from Glen Allen, but it's wonderful. Much like Northern Virginia, I look back at it now, and there's a little something nostalgia about missing the going out. A certain part of Broad Street, and it used to be farmland and rural out there.
Mhm.
But I got to say, Richmond and Glen Allen and that area was a great place to grow up. It's a wonderful community. I often share with folks when I look back at that time, it was just as special, right? There was a community, it was a village that watched out for you, made sure you were doing the right thing. A lot of folks knew you, both black and white, and knew your family, and so there wasn't too much you were going to get away with. But in terms of education, couldn't have asked for better education, couldn't have asked for a better place to grow up. And so, when we were living up north, my career had taken me all over the place, and we were living up north, and I remember having that conversation with my wife that I thought it would be great if we could move back to a place like Richmond, Virginia. And she said, that's not likely to happen. You're trying to find the right opportunity. And we found the right opportunity that
Mhm.
brought us back. And so, we've been quite fortunate that we've been able to come back and anchor ourselves in Richmond and live out in the Short Pump area, but still travel the world and have a company that does business with some wonderful partners located all over the world. So I love that Richmond is Richmond, and I get to be a part of this community and contribute, but also that I get to be out in the world and exploring and stimulated and learning from kind of other people that are doing really interesting things.
Yeah, it's just a great place to live. Now, what's the football culture of Richmond growing up? Now, Richmond is not known for football. I mean, maybe you have great players there, but it's not like the Hampton area where we know Hampton is great in football. Northern Virginia was always known for great baseball, and I think
Yeah.
Richmond was known for great baseball teams as well. What was the football culture in Richmond like when you were playing?
It's interesting. Richmond. So if you think back, you mentioned Maggie Walker earlier, right? I remember being a kid and you had the Maggie Walker Armstrong High School Classic. That's one of those great, great November, December games that happens. It's cold, City Stadium would be filled up. It's a great rivalry. So when you look back, that's kind of what I grew up watching is these kind of athletes. And as it turned out, Lou Anderson, who coached the Maggie Walker team, um, um, was one of my neighbors. So I grew up with his son. And so, right, that he was then tied in with Virginia State football. So my dad, of course, had played. And so we grew up with knowing that there were a lot of great athletes. Virginia Union had some fantastic athletes that had gone off to the NFL, and they were playing. And then, of course, there's a local high school in Richmond called, in addition to Maggie Walker and Armstrong at the time, but Highland Springs High School, which then just put out some amazing athletes. Now, in the last 10 years, Highland Springs has been a powerhouse across the state, and just in terms of dominating. But I remember being, a young, a middle school coming up, and you're watching a Brian Washington, and you're thinking, you're going to have a 6'2", 220-pound running back, defensive back. This is not even fair with 4% body fat, who goes off to play for Nebraska and then goes off to play for the Cowboys. And I remember watching that guy just going, he's a man among children right now. So there was some great, but to your point, if you could go down and play against the teams in the 7-5-7, that's when you knew we had some great talent here. But when you could go down and test yourself against the Hampton Crabbers and Warwick High School and some of those folks and hold your own against those teams, then you knew you were doing some things. And when we got to the state championship game and we're playing against some of those teams, right, then we knew that it's like we had taken a step up. Richmond football had taken a step up, and just remember that that's kind of the progression. But Richmond football now is in a really good place, just in terms of some of the talent that's coming out of here and some of the kids that you see. Russell Wilson comes out of here as kind of an underrated guy that I wish we had had the foresight to bring to UVA versus letting him slip away to NC State for 3 years. So there's certainly some talent here, not to be overlooked.
Yeah, I think I'm going to hear from some Brian and Highland Springs fans for that comment I made about Richmond football. So I got a feeling that's coming. So we'll get back to your high school career at Hermes in a minute. But you're talking about football today. Football has been in trouble because of the injuries, concussions, everything, the CT. But I actually know that they've done a lot to make the line play safer, to make the blocking safer. When you look at football today, I know you have 3 girls, but would you allow your son to play football like you did? And do you feel confident in football survival?
I think so. Simple question is yes. I feel like we've taken the steps have been taken in the game that should have been taken a very long time ago. There's no question about it. And I remember having a conversation with Willie Lanier, top 50 all-time NFL great. He's based here in Richmond.
Oh,
And
really?
Willie, we were having lunch one day, and he was just saying to me that he injured, I think it was his neck long ago, and it could have been a career-ending injury. And he said at that moment, he was still a young man, new to the NFL, but that he realized he needed to change the way he played the game. And as a result of that injury and changing the way he played the game, it allowed him to protect himself and keep himself safer. So if I had a son today, would I let him play? I'd let him play, but I think it would be really important to me, the who's coaching, what's being emphasized in the importance, how do you protect yourself? Certainly it's a dangerous game, and one needs to take steps to protect. But I think there's a lot that can be done. I like the way that officiating happens now in terms of protecting folks, both their not only their knees and their body, but also their head, because I think we've learned a tremendous amount since that movie came out, probably 5 or 10 years ago now, about CTE health, and I think we're going to continue to learn more about it. But the other exciting piece to me is get the technology right. Let's make sure that we're protecting people's heads. Let's make sure that athletes aren't using their heads as much, but it is still an incredibly physical game. There's no doubt about that. And that's an element of the game that is hard to remove completely, just because, you know, it's physical contact. You're still hitting someone, you're still tackling someone. But you know, the game's been good to me over time, and I really enjoyed it, and enjoyed kind of a ton of the moments in the team and the camaraderie and all that came with it.
Yeah. Well, you teased the fact that you guys got to the state tournament
Yeah.
in football, which I didn't know. Tell us a little bit about your high school career. Tell us about your coach, what you learned from him, and a little bit about your career, maybe some of your key teammates.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. You know, it's interesting. My coach was a guy named Gus Allen, who had come up from South Carolina, and you know, as a freshman, I, you know, much like many freshmen, I thought I should have been playing varsity, and he was kind of that. He was that old school guy that said, "Nope, you know, you need to go ahead and play that freshman, you know, ball and play JV." And literally, I don't think that was very fair to probably some of the folks on the JV team that had to face me. So what he would do, which was funny, there's a great guy here in town, George Braxton, and he loves to
Oh, I know
tease me.
Brack.
You
I
know
went to law
Brack.
school. I went to law school, Brack.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Brack like loves to joke, and he posted this on Facebook recently that he hated when they would bring me up to come practice with the varsity team, because all of a sudden he's like, where'd they get this guy from? You know, this freshman who isn't really built like a freshman, who doesn't move like a freshman, and certainly is a pretty strong guy. And so I loved going up and doing that. But you know, I think playing for Gus, you know, taught me a lot. I had a chance to learn and develop, and I think when I look back on it now, he didn't bring me along too fast. And back to your point about, you know, little league, a kid playing up, right? It was, let's let this guy go ahead and mature and have the chance to grow and mature as a freshman, because we're going to have three great years, assuming he stays healthy. We're going to have 3 great years of him playing varsity football. But it was just a wonderful. I got a chance to learn how to be an athlete. I got a chance to learn how to manage the attention that comes with, you know, being on all Met teams and some of that kind of stuff. Played with some great guys. Most did not go and play D1. We had a number of folks that went and played at either Union or State or a couple of different places, down to South Carolina, some smaller schools down in South Carolina. But you know, just some talent. I think some of those guys absolutely could have been playing ball at the next level, no doubt about it, but just didn't get that shot of that visibility. Interestingly enough, along the way, I was introduced to, I did football camp in this, I think it must have been my 8th grade year, 7th or 8th grade year, did camp at U of R, and then had interest in going to camp at UVA. Long ago, they used to have these great football camps. So, you know, we were having fun and going and hanging out. But when we made the switch and I started going to camp at UVA, it brought me into contact with the UVA coaches. And I'm sure I didn't know it at the time, but I'm sure they were probably thinking, man, this is the greatest recruiting tool ever. Like, here we go. We've got this guy that shows up, and you know, he's got a little baby fat on him, but he works hard, and he's pretty athletic. And so, you know, we started building a relationship. I loved going to camp there, started to fall in love with school, and so it kept bringing me back there. So, you know, that was going on at the same time. And then just in terms of the high school ball, loved playing. I still to this day say playing high school football is special. Like, there's no TV contracts, there's no you know, all of the other stuff that comes with it. It's a Friday night under the lights, with some kids that this is going to be as good as it ever gets for them, and they're just living their best lives, and you get a chance to I'm getting goosebumps talking about it.
Yeah.
But you just have a blast, and you're hanging out at the Pizza Hut afterwards. And when I started to realize, Julian, that it was a little different, is, you know, all of a sudden, sophomore year, right, you know, getting enough attention, it's like, oh, well, you need to go and visit some places. And so sophomore, junior year, my dad and I would finish playing a game on a Friday night. And sometimes on a Friday night, we might hop right in the car because we were going off to go visit a school and see their games on Saturday. And to me, that was a special time, because it was a lot of time of he and I just in the car together, you know, going out to Tennessee to see a game, going down to North Carolina to see a game. And I remember I'd grown up as a kid saying, man, I had an aunt who lived in California, and I wanted to go to Southern Cal. Uh, and the opportunity popped up. You know, I could start to see, you know, right by junior year, it's like, hey, you're not a great basketball player. Stop playing basketball. You're going to injure yourself. And I was more of a football player on the basketball court. But you know, it was put foot basketball to the side, and I could start to see where things were going to go, and these opportunities were starting to unfold for me. And I remember having the conversation with my parents that, hey, I think I really would love to go to California to go to school. And they were like, hey, they never prevented me from doing anything. So I love them for that. And they said, that's great, but we're probably only going to see you play one time a year. This is 1985, 84. It's like we don't have the money to hop on airplanes and go back and forth all that much. And that was one of the factors that played into me. Even I didn't even go and visit schools in California. And then when I started thinking more about having the opportunity that my parents could see me play every week, and they missed one game in 5 years, and my grandfather could be in Charlottesville and come participate and be a part of UVA and see me play and watch his grandsons be a part of that. And then, when the guys like, Sean and Ray Savage and Mark Cook and who else came in there? Paul Collins out of Richmond, Joe Hall, I'm thinking about Keith McMeans and just all these great talent, man, from all over the state of Virginia were signing and coming to Virginia. We were just like, I'm going to Virginia. This is like where I'm going. And there wasn't any question about it. And it just felt right, and like the right fit academically and athletics. And so that was it, man.
Yeah, and not to mention this is before cable TV, so your parents couldn't have watched every game. You would have gone to USC, UCLA. They would have seen some of those games, but there wasn't a lot of cable football back then, so they might not have seen you play at all if you didn't go. Before we get to UVA, just tell us a little bit about your state run, because I know you got to the state tournament in football. Who did you guys beat in Richmond to get there, and who did you guys face down at state?
That was a long time ago, so I'm just trying to think back. We were playing in the Colonial Athletic District at that point, so we would have been playing teams like Huguenot. Okay. We would have been playing Holland Springs, which was incredibly competitive. We would have been playing Patrick Henry. And so that, if memory serves me correct, the banner is still hanging in the gym at Hermitage High School. But I think we had to win, and some of my teammates remember far better than I do. But I think we certainly had to win, at least 8 or 9 games, maybe 10. And that's one of those things that kind of, until Coach Patrick Kane came along and blew all of our records out of the water. I think that we it was 10. We ultimately ended up losing in the state to Hampton, but we got a chance. I had always wanted to play in City Stadium, and so Richmond City Stadium, and that was our chance to play on the AstroTurf, because back then it was a big.
That's so terrible now.
Oh my gosh, I look back on that now and go, it's the probably the worst thing possible, and especially back then that AstroTurf was rolled out on asphalt, not on like some nice soft kind of tire cushions or something. And people, were crying afterwards in the shower because they'd lost half the skin off their arm. But we lost that game. But I do remember the fact that it was just one of those magical runs that year, just in terms of teams and the athletes that we had on the team. And so it was a great time.
So, well, anyway, Ron, you end up going to UVA, and I remember I met you. I saw you play a little bit first in the fall there, but we had a class together your spring semester, your first year. And I remember you came in, you sat right in the front row class. And here, you were a big dude. So you're probably what, 6'4", about 280 or so?
You got it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you weren't one of these athletes that was going to hide in the back row. Maybe the teacher won't know if you're missing one day. I remember you sat with my friend Kim. Her maiden name has escaped me now. It's Kim Turner now.
Yeah.
You guys sat right in the front row every single class. It was African American Studies class. Yeah.
So it's so funny. Part of what really, it's interesting you make that observation, because I think the thing that appealed to me most about going to the university was I knew from, in my house, academics was always important, right? So occasionally there was that threat of, if you're not taking care of your grades, then you don't get to do sports. And my folks knew how important sports were to me. That was kind of my outlet. So I think, certainly by the time I got to UVA, one of the things that I really wanted to do is to make sure that I got not only the most out of the athletics of the place, but I also got the most out of the academics there. And I said this in the article for the alumni magazine, which is, what a dynamic group of people to be around. I felt like it was incredibly talented teachers and coaches and students and friends, and you just look around and you're just blown away I remember calling, I was taking a business class, and I remember calling one of the guys on the team, um, who's Dave Cardenas, who is now a private equity guy up in New York, and I'm working on financial formulas or something because I'd taken this class in the comm school. And I just remember thinking, my gosh, like how brilliant these folks are that are around me. And Tom Burns, who was a young linebacker, he was probably a freshman first year when I was fourth year, and he's a engineering major, and he's doing an internship at the White House one summer, right? And so, this is it. So when you talk about, sitting in the front of class, to me, I was just like, this is amazing. I want to like soak all of this experience up. And I got to be honest, Julian, you get an invitation, whether it's to go to Cars Hill or to an alumni's home for something. I was that guy who's like, everything I can go and do and experience, I'm going to do it all and take it in over this 4 or 5 years, because it was clear to me that this was a special place to be, and I wanted to make the most of it.
Yeah. Well, how are you treated as a student? Did you feel like you had to overcome a presumption you're like this big jock, or did you feel like you were treated fairly and you put the work in and you got the grades to reflect that?
No, I don't, honestly, I can honestly say I never felt that someone was looking at me and going, "Oh, this person doesn't belong to be here, or they're not contributing, or they're not bright, or they don't have their own thoughts." I mean, literally, and that was the thing that was appealing to me about being in Charlottesville was, um, you know, the friend group that, right, didn't only exist of athletes, because that was one of the things that I found appealing when I went there, which was, oh, there's no football dorm, right? There are some schools I visited, and you're like, wait a minute, you're going to isolate yourself and be only in this football dorm. That wasn't what I wanted. I wanted the full experience. My roommate was a guy named Derwin Greggs,
Oh,
great,
I know, Darwin.
yeah, running back, and we were roommates first year, and so you had a football player as a roommate going through a similar experience, but the rest of the suite were regular UVA students, and so I never felt there was any of that. I felt like if you went in and you put the work in and you were curious, and most of the guys I knew on the team, yeah, they put the same amount of work in because they were as proud of their degree as they were about what we were accomplishing on the football field. And I think that was to a person consistent, for the most part, in terms of how we thought about things and approached it, which was we felt like you could be great at both. Like it wasn't an either or situation, but that you needed to do both. And I think one of the things we often talk about the former players is that our graduation rate was one of the highest, and I think it might have exceeded the broader university at one point, but certainly was one of the best in NCAA athletics, because it was like 92 or 93% or something crazy. At the same time that we're competing and winning, and winning 10 games a year, 9 games a year, that kind of thing. So to us, I think that was the thing that was outstanding. And so no, I never thought about, were we less than or not contributing or shouldn't be here. It felt like this is very much the right place to be.
Yeah, my recollection is we loved our sports. We treated you guys like gods, but I just, sometimes the point of view is different if you're that person in the arena. Did you? I don't remember you redshirting for sure. You played right away, right? There was no
I
red
got
shirt.
a, I ended up, I played right away, but I ended up getting a medical red shirt. So my
Okay.
first game I get to play is University of South Carolina, right? They
Mhm.
come to Charlottesville. They're beating up on us. I get a chance to go in, and I go to make a tackle on the visitors sideline,
Mhm.
get my left knee rolled and damage it at that point. And literally after that, because I hadn't played, I think I can't remember what the criteria was at the time for getting a red shirt, but I hadn't played enough times. They made a petition to the NCAA, the school did, and I was able to redshirt that year.
Okay. So, what was George Welsh like? Now, if I knew a lot of athletes, a lot of football players, so I heard a lot of funny George Welsh stories over the years. What were your perceptions of George Welsh? What was his style, and what did you learn from him?
George, everything. I'll just start with everything you heard or felt thought about George is true, right? In terms of, I mean, George was a tough man, and he had come out of the mountains of Pennsylvania, and clearly had worked hard, and his way of winning was, a particular way, and there was a way you're going to go about doing things. I have so much, I appreciated the man then, absolutely, no doubt about it. He built something incredibly special. But I got to be honest, I appreciate him so much more as I've gotten older, and I hear the stories of how he thought about putting together a recruiting class, or kind of his accomplishments at the Naval Academy when he was a Heisman Trophy candidate himself, or I mean, when we did his funeral, and all of a sudden you see Franco Harris show up, you see people from the Naval Academy. These were all people that he had influenced throughout his life and career. It's pretty amazing. And then when you look at the guy come to Charlottesville, and what does he do? 16 or 17 years there, um, with a pretty amazing win rate for a program that really hadn't done very much but pre 1984. You're like, wow. Now he could be funny as all get out. I mean, you've heard the story. I still think it's one of the most amazing things that happened in practice. Because forever he was, he'd have his baseball cap on, and he's I don't know, 5'8", let's call it, right? And all of a sudden he's moving around like a ghost, and he'll pop up on your left or right side at any point. But then you get hit with one of those, Christ, what are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you running the play this way? Go, or he's telling you to go jog a lap because you've done something stupid in practice. So what an awesome guy, though. I just so much respect for him, and respect for the family. I could not have been more delighted than to have spent time with him as a player and as a tri-captain.
Yeah. Well, you picked the perfect time to get there. UVA had no football tradition and really no sports tradition before Ralph got there in 70, 78, 79. But you picked, your timing was perfect. And by your junior year, I think you guys opened up. I think we opened up with Notre Dame and Penn State. So here you are going to UVA, probably not thinking you're going to a top 10 program. But all of a sudden, junior year, we're playing two of the most storied programs in football history. And we actually beat Penn State that year.
Yeah. So here's the thing, interestingly enough, right? When we were making the decision to go, most of us, I don't think we were even thinking it's not a top 10 program. I think we were thinking, oh, this is fertile ground for us to do something special. And I think we looked back at the class of 86. Those of us that came in 86, I think we looked back and said, wait a minute, this can be something really special. We knew year one was, we just got served up. It was like, okay. But what we knew is we could see the talent level. We could see the talent level in practice. We could see it starting to gel. And so, to your point, we could see progress in year two, where we then do the All-American Bowl, and we can see progress in year three. And so, yeah, when we knew, it was interesting. We knew that camp that year when we beat Penn State, we knew that we were coming in probably the best condition, best shape. There was a maturity, like we have figured out how to do this D1 kind of thing and be competitive. And we believed, right? Sean's finding his groove. The defense is finding its groove. Ray Savage is doing his thing. I'm doing my thing at nose tackle. We had the pieces of the puzzle coming together. And interestingly enough, what I remember about the Penn State game is it had been an incredibly hot summer down in Virginia, that Charlottesville humidity and all the rest. But in Happy Valley up in Penn State, it had been pretty mild. Well, what happened on game day for them, which I think they probably thought this is going to be a cakewalk game for, we're inviting Virginia up, but it ended up being incredibly hot that day. And oh my goodness, you want to talk about some folks that sun was beating down on them. And of course, we'd been doing it all summer down in Virginia with 100% humidity. So for us, it just played to our advantages. We were ready to run all day. And I think, we believed, and the factors came together, the conditions came together, and it started off a great year that year.
Yeah, and it ended up great too, because I believe we won the Citrus Bowl, right? And so
lost the Citrus Bowl to Illinois. Jeff George was the quarterback. Played them pretty well down there, but ended up losing down there. Won the All-American Bowl against BYU the year before.
Oh, that's right.
Lost in the Citrus Bowl, and then of course we'll get to it. But that number one year where we then get to the Sugar Bowl, we should have beaten Tennessee while we had them, because we were up most of that game down at the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah. Well, let's get to your fifth year. 1990, one of the most famous seasons in UVA history. I think you obviously, I'm not saying you were favored in the ACC, but everyone knew we were going to be good. And I think it was between us and Clemson. And Clemson was a perennial favorite in the ACC. This is, I think,
Yeah.
before Florida State had gotten into the conference.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And my first recollection of that year is we beat Clemson. That was that was kind of like the big shot that started our season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You know what? I think I shared with you as we were talking about this conversation coming up, and I don't keep a ton of memorabilia up, but that is the one of the pictures I have, which is 20-7 on the scoreboard with the goalpost being torn down against the Clemson game, and I had never seen, excuse me, so much excitement. And of course I remember being at the game where Clemson beat Virginia. I think it was either 55-7 or something like that. And the
Nothing, 55-0.
55-0. And Fridge is doing his thing and all of the rest of it. And at that point, I can't even remember, was that a recruiting visit or my first year? But either way, that stuck in. And the other side of it is what stuck in my head is, right, we hadn't beaten them in 28 years in a row or something crazy. And that just kind of, that just hung with all of us. And so what a great game. I mean, we were amped up for that, but that is one of the pieces that I keep of history that I continue to remember that game, because that was just one of those great moments. I felt like we checked so many boxes that we beating Clemson, although they didn't have an ACC championship at the time, we beat Duke. But Duke, technically said they tied us for the ACC. But literally, we did incredibly well that year. So yeah, a lot of great memories.
Yeah, well, I think what actually happened is we beat Clemson, and Georgia Tech had been building also, because Bobby Ross, I don't think he'd been there but a couple of years.
That's right.
And so I don't think we had any reason to believe Georgia Tech was going to be that tough.
Right.
And so once we got by Clemson, it looked like the possibility was there for us to run the table and to really go all the way.
No doubt about it. Right. I think I think all of us were looking up thinking, man, we knew what the possibilities of this could be. But those are the moments where you're in a new territory at that point, right? Up to this point, we've been underdogs and finding our way through, and everybody knew we were talented on both offense and defense, with Herman and Sean on the offense, and you got Terry doing his thing, and then we're on defense, we were talented. So the pieces came together. So, I don't think we let ourselves down, but we certainly didn't have the best game that we could have had or should have had at that point, right? How different is that if you look at the rest of that schedule? Once we get past the Georgia Tech game, that could have been and should have been a really special rest of the year. But I love watching that segment on ESPN about how that Georgia Tech Virginia game and what it did for ACC and what it did for ACC football. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is something that's going to be that significant from a conference perspective and what it meant to the ACC. But certainly we knew it was a big deal for UVA sports.
Well, I remember that week going to school. At the time I was in law school, and I would walk by Minster's on the way to the bus, and I got the paper and it said USA Today were number one.
Yeah.
It was a very weird feeling.
Yeah.
And was there anything different about practice that week? Did you feel like people were like, wow, this is pretty incredible, or was it business as usual in practice?
No, I don't know that it was, I can't remember the specific week in terms of what it felt like. And I do know that we had a little bit of a break the previous week coming into it. And in fact, we had a meeting with Coach Welsh to have a day off or something like that along the way. But you could just, there was an energy, right? There's just an energy that comes with being number one in the country. And as you mentioned, talk about moving around the grounds. At that point, right, everybody's just moving. There's already excitement about the season, but there's just great pride. Everyone's, excited about it. And so, right, the thing that can come with those moments is, right, those moments just become overwhelming. So I can't remember anything that was so distinctive about it was a good practice or a bad practice. But I think sometimes, right, those are the moments that can set you up for a little bit of a drop off if you're not careful about maintaining the focus and the energy. And not that we were unfocused, because I don't think that was the case, but I think that there's just a level of distraction that can also come with those things. And I think often coaches try and keep you focused in the here and now so that you can actually play your best.
Yeah. Well, one thing about the Georgia Tech game, I do remember, I remember being up 2 or 3 touchdowns in the first half, and we had our subs in. And I don't know if it was because it was a warm day. He was trying to save legs for the second half, but I felt like this game we were in total control of this game. There was no issues. I distinctly remember us playing a lot of people in the first half. I'm like, man, we got this. Is my recollection correct? Did we play a lot of people in the first half?
Now, that part I don't remember. I bet you Sean could Sean and some of the guys could remember that more in terms of kind of what the rotation looked like. Certainly remember us being up, but certainly also remember those are the moments where you can start to feel things slip right out of you, like sand through your hand, and it's like we've got something, but where's it going? Like what this is coming down to a final kick, and I've got a buddy I worked with at Mars Candy years ago, and he used to love walking by me sometimes and just mentioning Scott Sisson's name. The Scott Sisson, of course, the kicker for Georgia Tech.
Yeah. Well, one thing you guys did, it was a horrible week in some ways for us, but look, we're still only lost one game. It's still the best season in UVA history. But you guys did something I thought was you guys deserve a lot of credit for. You went back on the road the next week. We beat UNC on the road, so you had to feel down. I mean, it was, and then I believe Sean was hurt. Did Sean break his thumb that game, or did he break his thumb later on in the year?
I'm trying to think back on that. Was it that game, or did he actually hurt his thumb in the Virginia Tech game?
Yeah, it's one of those games. Well, maybe he was still, but it still took a lot of guts for us to pick ourselves out off the canvas and beat UNC the next week. Do you remember that game?
Oh, I mean, certainly, it's the, and this is I remind folks all the time, right? It's the, you're still dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, and all of a sudden, right, you don't know what was off about the Georgia Tech game, but you knew something shifted in the momentum. I remember there being lots of conversations, even amongst us, of getting back the focus and asserting ourselves and playing the way that we knew how to play. And I just remember that being, kind of the much of the coaches would always put information up, the news articles up on boards in the locker room so you could see what other schools were saying, right? And so I just remember, right, the team didn't need the posting going up of who's saying what and is anyone talking trash. The team was already focused coming out of the fact that we had lost, and we knew we had something really special just slipped through our hands. And so certainly the foot was back on the gas pedal after that. Like, no, this is something that's back, that we're going to be asserting ourselves.
Yeah, and as good as we were, Maryland, UNC, and University of Maryland and Tech. I mean, those are two more bitter rivals that we had. The Maryland rivalry was a huge rivalry in those days, and you kind of feel like they wanted to hit us when we were at our loftiest. Do you have recollection of those games as well? I'm sure they're not probably the happiest memories in the world.
Yeah, I think more than anything else, it was, you started to feel, you could just start, and look, at that point in the season, everyone's got nicks and bruises and all kinds of things, but you could just start to feel it at certain points, right, that you didn't have folks kind of at their best and their fullest capabilities at times. And so just remember, again, right, once you lose the number one ranking, and that thing is just still sitting in the back of your head a little bit, but you're trying to make sure that you muscle through and you finish strong. There's not a particular thing that stands out. I do remember, because we, going into the Virginia Tech game, not so much Maryland, but Virginia Tech, we already knew what the bowl bid process would be, so we knew where we were going at that point. And so then your mind starts to shift that Sean's hurt him his finger. He can't throw the football. And now all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, well, what does the rest of this look like in terms of kind of the offensive side of things? And so that was certainly something that I know weighed on everyone's minds.
Yeah. Well, you covered the Sugar Bowl game, losing to Purdue and Jeff George. That was a great game. I was down there for that. Did you know your football career was over? Did you think at all that you may try out for some NFL teams, or were you ready to go on to the next?
No, what was interesting is a number of the scouts had come into Charlottesville for workouts. Was having some pretty decent workouts. I'd never had a hamstring injury in my career, and I'm running the 40 for the scouts, and I basically tear my hamstring, and it becomes one of those where, at that point, I knew I wasn't going to be a draft pick. I thought, if anything, I would get a shot maybe at a late round, if that were a possibility, or free agency. And injured my hamstring, came back, I don't know how many weeks later, started running for some other scouts again, injured the other hamstring. And for me, I'm a big person of like, life has chapters to it, chapters open, chapters close. And for me, once it happened the second time, I thought, this isn't meant to be, right? It's draft didn't happen. Now I've got these hamstring injuries popping up for whatever reason. Felt like I probably could have gone and played at the next level, but then something clicked in me that it's like, well, this is what you came to the University of Virginia for. Like maybe it's time that this chapter is closing. No one said it to me, and it's like this chapter is closing, and you're ready to go and explore these other chapters. And that's literally what happened. I closed that door. There was a wonderful lady in the Office of Career Planning and Placement at UVA. And I remember her that spring reaching out to me saying, there's this wonderful group of people I want you to meet, the Mars company. They're going to be in town and you should come to this function that evening. And literally I went to the function that evening, got connected, and off and running things went with Mars. And so I kind of, and this has been true throughout my life, I just kind of pivoted, and it's like that chapter's closed and I feel like I got everything out of it that I wanted to get out of it. And now it's time to start a new chapter.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. Well, look, Ron, and last question. I really appreciate all your time. It's just, you've done so much. And then, you're the CEO of a marketing company, Tilt. This is where we started. Just tell us a little bit about how you created Tilt. I know you had a couple partners.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, it's an amazing achievement, and also maybe some of your other interesting projects that you guys have worked on.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, we had a vision. There was a small digital advertising firm I was running that was part of the Martin Agency here in Richmond, and I was fortunate enough to be president of that business. And I had the opportunity about 5 years ago to take that business private. And so that was the first part of the deal. And then the second part of the deal was, along the way, I was introduced to a wonderful video production firm in Richmond, the Park Group, and the owners of that company. And that kicked off a conversation for us of, I think we have an opportunity to really do something different in the marketing space by integrating these two businesses, the conceptual digital agency, as well as the post-production, which is going to be the animation, editorial, and the production side of the business. And what we really wanted to do, we started with this simple vision. We wanted to make things as easy and as efficient and as smart as possible for brands. That's what we wanted to do. And we wanted to have all of these services under one roof. Often in our world, these services are freelanced or contract. And what we realized is the world had changed significantly. It wasn't always about one branded TV spot. Now, all of a sudden, you would have numerous deliverables, online video, social channels, and just more content to talk about kind of the way your brand would work. And so we really leaned into that. Back in 2018, merged the companies together, integrated, rebranded them, and we've gone to market. And I'm so thankful for the wonderful partners that we've got that we've worked with over the last 5 years. We've had a chance to do everything from beautiful kind of footage for Audi and having some of that show up at the Peterson Automotive Museum, to partnering in the financial sector with wonderful partners, to doing some things with the Wounded Warrior team. And it's just, I'm so thankful that, we've got a wonderful team of about 55 folks based between Richmond at our studio and our headquarters and down in Bentonville, Arkansas, because we also get a chance to do some wonderful work with our partners at Walmart. So it's pretty amazing. And I love the fact that we get to base this company in Richmond, Virginia, but have it reaching and doing work all over the world. So we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, well, you should be. Well, maybe one day we can collaborate on a project. I love what you guys are doing, and I'm fascinated by your documentary. I'm sure you have other great ideas. You might end up doing more documentaries and movies than you ever thought you would. So
that's a possibility. We will certainly see what the future brings. I think we started something with a purpose, and we wanted to impact people's lives, and that was kind of we impact some, partners and the lives of those we come into contact with our commercial work. But the documentary was our first kind of passion project on that. I think we will certainly do more of those in the future.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, look, Ron, this has been great. Hopefully we can connect in person one of these days. I'll be at my son's starting UVA in the fall, so I'll be there more often. So maybe I'll see you at a game or something, but I'd love to see you in person.
Congratulations on your son, and go Who's. Nice to have the next generation showing up in Charlottesville, and I look forward to seeing you at a game this year.
Yeah, that'd be great, Ron. Yeah. Well, look, man.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, thanks for your time, buddy.
All right, be well.
All right, take care. Yeah, bye-bye.